As I moved slowly from the on-deck circle, a hush fell over the capacity-filled stadium. I stepped across the thin white line into the batter's box and deliberately let my spikes find a home in the dirt. My fingers tightened on the well-worn grooves in the Louisville Slugger that had been as much a part of me as the name the sports writers had given me since I came up from a farm team. In defiance of the pitcher, I stretched the old bat out in front of me, indicating where I wanted him to put his best fastball. My concentration narrowed, and I ignored the crude comments made by the catcher. I fixed my eyes on the pitcher's face. In the next few minutes, the game could go either way, but it was now up to me to win for every fan whose eyes were now trained on my trusty slugger. The first ball whizzed by. It was not for me. The second slid across the strike zone. The third was another ball, as was the next, and then a ball called a strike. Full count. I ignored the quips from the bums in their dugout and tightened my fingers around the old pine slugger. The pitcher began his windup, and as the leather-bound projectile left his fingers, I knew it was now or never. Instinctively, my body began to twist as the bat moved through the wind, cutting an edge that could be heard in the upper deck. The bat and ball collided with a crack that echoed through this old park as the ball started its journey to the upper deck in center field. The cracking sound continued to echo through my head, drowning out the roar of the crowd as my spikes dug the dirt heading for first. The game had been won. I gave them what they came for, the World Series. My trip around the bases was interrupted, like so many times before, as my mother shook me, telling me it was time to get up and get ready for school. The old ballpark faded into the sunlight, which lit the baseball posters, photos, and pennants covering every inch of my bedroom walls. Yeah, it was a dream, but one that someday I hoped I could make come true.
Every young Yankee fan dreamed of playing here in a World Series championship game alongside legends like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, and Reggie Jackson. Of all the old stadiums, none of them had a look of pure dynamic power as did this galactic Coliseum. Even today, the reconstructed Yankee Stadium stands like a temple to the legendary men who played on its field of champions. Fred Lieb of the New York Evening Telegram would tag it, "The house that Ruth built." In the early 20s, 15 steel and concrete stadiums were built to replace the early wooden bleacher parks. Each of these mighty structures had a personality all its own, a history etched in the memories of those that loved the game, and so as not to be forgotten, have seen fit to put those moments to pen and celluloid. Join me now as we listen to the echoes from those great temples of baseball.
He was nice enough to give me my rookie uniform, and when I looked at it, it had number 19.
I really enjoyed playing against the Yankees because they were the best.
I know for a fact that the foul line down that third baseline was just tilted in.
Haven't paid to see a ball game since about 1930, I don't think.
Baseball owes its beginnings to a kid street game played long before the Pilgrims set foot, bat or ball, on Plymouth Rock. A stick, a ball, and a couple of guys made up what was needed to have a game of rounders, one of several ancestors to the American game of baseball. No one is quite sure when the first ball met bat in America, but legend tells us that in 1839, a young man named Abner Doubleday from Cooperstown, New York, devised the basic rules for a new kind of baseball. Actually, Doubleday was in his second year as a cadet at West Point when he allegedly introduced his form of baseball and laid out the now familiar diamond. And interestingly enough, there is no known record of this young cadet playing the game of Doubleday baseball. The true origins of baseball may continue to be shrouded in mystical garments, almost as if the sport was delivered fully clothed from the playgrounds of the gods. However, the etymology of the term baseball has an unusual first reference in the Oxford English Dictionary, a reference which may surprise some of you.
Jane Austen, whose novels Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma are admired as among the finest in the English language. In 1816, in her novel, Northanger Abbey, she made a reference to cricket, baseball, riding on horseback, and running about the country. Jane Austen, 1785 to 1817.
Did Jane's heroine, Catherine Morland, in fact, beat them all to the plate? We'll never really know. Abraham Lincoln had just lost his bid for the Senate when the game of baseball was beginning to become a serious sport. On Tuesday, July 10th, 1858, a couple of thousand people paid a stiff 50 cents apiece to get into Fashion Racecourse near Flushing on Long Island, New York, to watch baseball. That day, a team representing New York would meet an all-star team from Brooklyn. It was the first match in what was planned as a three-game series that brought together some of the best players in the country. They were part of the newly formed 14-team National Association of Baseball Players, the NABBP.
Spectators arrived on horseback, carriage, and special trains which ran for the occasion. The final score was New York 22, Brooklyn 18. It was the most talked about and watched game of the time, but more importantly, it would represent what was to come in the following years.
You'll have to wait a few minutes till I get my time at bat. Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of a baseball game as he was informed he had been nominated for president.
The game of baseball as a spectator sport would eventually grow into a business and an opportunity to create a sporting event suitable for the entire family. But its popularity would be slowed as President Lincoln called for 75,000 male volunteers to serve 3 months in order to crush the Confederate Army's march against federal troops. For almost 5 years, this young nation would be torn apart as the war between the states blasted its cannons across the land. Young men marched off to fight for the ideals of politicians whose faces most had never seen, and until now, whose voices had never been heard. When it was over, more Americans had lost their lives than in any other war, past or future, and our 16th president would fall to an assassin's bullet.
Organized baseball was mostly a northeastern game called town ball, and in this form was introduced to the Southern captured soldiers while in Union prison camps. Many of the young Yankee soldiers carried a stitched hide ball in their pack, and there was always someone who was ready to produce a hand-carved bat. The outline of a crude diamond would be marked in the dirt. A crowd would begin to gather, and for a little while the war seemed far away.
The man who was credited with putting the rules to paper, Abner Doubleday, was now busy making a name for himself as a distinguished Union officer. However, it would not be his war record that would eventually place the name General Abner Doubleday in the history books, but rather Doubleday's alleged drawings and sketches of the game of baseball. Another name emerges from the pre-war years, maybe not as well known as Doubleday, but possibly as important to the game. Alexander Joy Cartwright was a teller at New York Union Bank and had organized a group of professional men into a baseball club known as the Knickerbockers. They played a form of the game then called the New York game with new rules. Rules which on September 23, 1845, Cartwright and several other members of the Knickerbockers put to paper and eventually would be the basis for the game played by the National Association of Baseball Players, formed in 1858. An interesting note is that Cartwright's immediate supervisor at the bank was Daniel Ebbets, the father of the man who would eventually build Ebbets Field.
One big difference in Knickerbocker ball was the elimination of soaking, where a fielder would throw the ball directly at the runner, hitting him before he reached the base. In Knickerbocker ball, the fielder would throw the ball to the baseman before the runner arrived at the base. And by the way, the players did not wear gloves then, but rather caught the ball barehanded.
Cartwright did not stick around to see his game turn from a weekend leisure activity to a highly organized, competitive spectator sport. He was off to find his fortune in the gold fields of California, and on his long journey, he spread the word to anyone who would listen, anyone from fellow travelers to barkeepers to miners and Indians.
During the past week, We have passed the time in fixing wagon covers, stowing property, etc., varied by hunting and fishing and playing baseball. It is comical to see mountain men and Indians playing the new game. I have the ball with me that we use back home. Alexander Cartwright, diary entry of April 23rd, 1849.
Eventually, Cartwright, along with another New York ball player, Frank Turk, formed the first San Francisco Baseball Club.
It can safely be said that the field on which the Knickerbockers played, Elysian Field just outside Hoboken, became the first real open spectator ballpark, even though the club did not promote outsiders viewing their games. The park was owned by John Cox Stevens, who founded the New York Yacht Club in 1844 and won the first 100 Guinea Cup, later to be renamed the America's Cup. Stevens, along with other ball clubs that used the park, eventually even charged a viewing fee. Stevens ran a ferry line between Hoboken and Barclay Street in New York City. He charged 13 cents for a round-trip ticket. But if you're looking to pinpoint the first fenced-in park, it would have to be Union Grounds in East Brooklyn. It was opened in 1862 during the war by William H. Kammeyer, who had drained and filled in the property, which he had been operating as a skating pond in the winter. He charged 10 cents to see the various teams from Brooklyn play by the NABBP rules. Other Eastern promoters built fenced-in parks as fans increased and new teams were formed. The Knickerbocker Baseball Club remained aloof, shying away from the spectator game, which by the 1860s had become very lucrative for the promoters.
Is baseball so popular that it is a regular and well-understood diversion in most of the counties, in most of the states of the Union? Do young men naturally learn baseball in Massachusetts, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and in Louisiana? Could a baseball match be got up in every town of 10,000 inhabitants throughout the country? For our part, we regret to say that we doubt very much whether baseball be a popular game at all in the interior, or in any part of the country except in a few great cities. We see no evidence that either baseball or any other athletic game is so generally practiced by our people as to be fairly called a popular American game. Harper's Weekly, October 15, 1859.
Americans were in the mood for something the man in the street could call his own. Harper's Weekly or not, baseball was it. As the sport grew in popularity, so did the need for larger parks to accommodate the crowds that now made the game an event for the whole family.
With the building of larger wooden fenced-in bleacher parks came another twist to the game. Players now demanded a cut of the gate and even wanted to be paid for their weekend talents. Professional baseball was now a reality. Not only did the parks take on a new and more prosperous look, but the game itself began to change. The game of baseball that was played back in the 1860s was a far cry from what we know to be the great American pastime of today. The umpire, usually wearing a suit and top hat, stood or sat at an umbrella-covered table just off to the side and behind the catcher, who was positioned about 10 feet behind the batter and took the pitch barehanded. In 1876, the umpires were no longer allowed to question spectators in order to get their advice about a play. Even so, many continued to let the umps know exactly how they felt about a call. The ball was delivered to the batter underhanded, much like softball is played today. Overhand pitching was not introduced to the game until 1884. Home plate was in the shape of a diamond rather than the pentagon shape of today, and was only 45 feet from the pitcher's box, located just in front of the center of an even-sided diamond. The pitcher's box would be changed to the pitcher's rubber. It prevented the pitcher from delivering the ball from anywhere within a 5.5 by 4 foot box. As of 1893, he had to push off from this 12-inch by 4-inch rubber board. With this change came the third recorded movement of the distance from the pitcher to home plate. The 1893 official distance was actually a misprint. 60 feet became 60.6 feet when the O became .6. Misprint or not, the new rule entered the books. This new ruling occurred the same year that the catcher's protective mask was brought to the game.
The ever-changing count on the batter also continued to go back and forth between 4 strikes, 5 balls, and 3 strikes, 4 balls, as well as other variations. Finally, the 3 strikes and you're out and 4 balls you walk rule was placed in the books between the 1888 and 89 seasons and remains there to date. The Great American Hot Dog did not show up in the ballpark until 1900, when food vendor Harry Stevens took credit for selling the first ballpark frank at the Polo Grounds. He also claimed he gave the bun and sausage its name, Hot Dog. In 1876, Ulysses S. Grant was serving out his last term as the 18th President of the now United States. Alexander Graham Bell was awarded the first patent on the telephone. Sitting Bull Sioux Indians had attacked and killed General George Custer with 265 men of the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Americans had celebrated this country's 100th birthday. That same year, William Holbrook, director of the financially successful Chicago White Stockings, organized and founded the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs. The issue of professionalism, which had led to the demise of the NABBP, the Non-Professional Players Association, and the birth of the Professional Players Association, was now the very foundation of Holbert's National League. Ball players would play the game full-time by written contract with the owners. When they were not playing or promoting the game, they were to be in training sessions. The NABBP was soon doomed by the more high-level corporate-type organizational style of the new league. The power of the inner workings of the game shifted from player to financiers and the owners of the clubs. By 1880, baseball cards and other collectibles delighted the fans, who, by the way, were for the most part the working class. Baseball had become the game of the American people.
The game of baseball has always been linked in my mind with the mystic texture of childhood, with the sounds and smells of summer nights, and with the memories of my father. Doris Kearns Goodwin, from Father with Love, Boston Globe, 1986.
A cricket player by the name of Harry Wright learned to play ball with the Knickerbockers at Elysian Field on the weekends, but soon found that his talents as a ball player and organizer were needed in the growing game of professional baseball. In 1868, he became player and captain of the Cincinnati Club for the same salary he was getting from the Union Cricketers. He would never again return to cricket, but would bring to the game of baseball a new kind of thinking. By the time Holbert's National League was formed, Wright had already set the standards for professional baseball players. He created regular practice sessions and schooled each player on how to play their position better. He changed the uniforms worn by the players of the time by eliminating the pantaloons and introduced the formal knickers and woolen stockings. His players wore bright red stockings and were soon tagged the Cincinnati Red Stockings. He made them understand that baseball was a serious profession, and his demanding style paid off as the team made a clean sweep of just about everyone they played. In the first season, they won 56 straight games. In the 1870 season, they won 83 straight games, creating the most impressive showing of any club, pro or non-pro, to date. At the end of the 1870 season, the team disbanded and returned to an amateur standing. Wright and several of the best players joined the Boston Club, and before long, the Wright style would bring unchallenged fame to the new Red Stockings, tagged so by the Boston fans or some very clever promoter. They won 4 consecutive championships from 1872 to 1875. The noted outstanding pitcher for the team was Albert G. Spaulding. He would go on to not only make a name for himself as a star player, but also as part owner of Holbert's Chicago team. Eventually, in 1882, he was made president of the National League following Holbert's death. Spaulding retired as a player to join his brothers in the sporting goods business that soon landed the exclusive rights to supplying baseballs to the National League. The league forbade Sunday games or the sale of alcoholic beverages. Cincinnati was expelled for refusing to abide by these rules. This would allow Detroit to join the league at the end of the 1880 season. Cincinnati, the city that had founded the National League, was now an outsider. By the end of the 1899 season, professional baseball had spread across the country, creating a number of so-called professional leagues or associations. From New York to California, the rules had changed greatly from the old Knickerbockers New York game. Privately owned ballparks were still wooden fenced lots with irregular dimensions and odd features like lopsided fields, gravel playing fields, and unruly grass that was soggy in the spring and sun-baked stone hard in the summer. Only a few had toilet facilities for women. The players had to change into their uniforms at the hotel and endure the ride to the park in an open horse-drawn trolley, giving way to either applause, curses, or even insults to where eggs were thrown. The wooden bleachers, some covered, some open to the weather, were fire traps. Few seasons went by where there wasn't a major fire at a ballpark, mostly due to careless smokers. The look of the game had begun to stabilize. Umpires served on full-time staffs with salaries of $1,000 to $2,000 per season. Not much considering what they had to put up with from the spectators, players, and sports writers.
Many baseball fans look upon an umpire as a sort of necessary evil to the luxury of baseball, like the odor that follows an automobile. Christy Mathewson, ace pitcher for the Giants.
Catchers and fielders now wore gloves that had padded thumbs and palms. Admission was still 50 cents, and the selling of alcoholic beverages within the park was now up to the locals. Sunday games were permissible in most cities. The moguls of the game were totally in charge, leaving the players little to say about the destiny of the game. Most players had taken a cut in their salaries back in 1892, and the baseball bosses were not rushing to change that trend, even though some teams had made a sharp improvement in their profits as they reached the turn of the century.
After all my years, there are two things I've never got used to: haggling with a player over his contract and telling a boy he's got to go back. Connie Mack.
20th century had arrived. William McKinley was the 25th President of the United States. Somehow the American people had made it through some pretty tough years and now looked forward to building a much greater and stronger industrial nation. Electric horseless carriages were beginning to appear on big city streets, and a young ex-employee of Thomas Edison had been encouraged by the inventor to develop a gas-driven carriage. His name was Henry Ford. Mr. Edison had produced his first motion picture that played on his motion machine. It projected a light through a chemically treated, sprocketed celluloid provided to him by a man named George Eastman. Just before the 1900 season was to open, the National League owners voted to operate with only 8 franchises. Baltimore, Washington, Louisville, and Cleveland were out. Lack of available money for the proper capitalization by some clubs was the reason given. A new league would emerge from the National League squabbles with its members. It would be formed from the prosperous minor Western League by a proven, brilliant baseball enthusiast named Ban Johnson, who took advantage of the 4 dropped National League franchises to create the American League. Detroit, Milwaukee, and Boston would also join Johnson's defiant move against the National League before the start of the next season. With the financial backing of Charles Summers, millionaire and majority owner of the Cleveland Club, Johnson informed the National League bosses that he would no longer abide by the agreement, which gave his league only minor league status. The American League was born, and Johnson had won a major battle. But the war after 1901 would be fought as the World Series. 4 of Ban's lieutenants were one-time player-manager Charles Comiskey, who now owned the Chicago White Stockings, pitcher-manager Clark Griffith, a major league manager by the name of Cornelius McGillicuddy, and John McGraw, manager of the Orioles. They would take to the circuit to find the best of the best to play and be paid a fair salary with the growing new league. The American League ended its first season in the money as close to 1,700,000 fans paid to see American League games.
The baseball fan who comes into our parks should always be sure that he's watching the same game he played as a boy. He shouldn't be baffled by any confounded new rules. There is no need for any. Clark Griffith.
The modern baseball park was about to be born. The biggest park at the turn of the century was the old Polo Grounds located on Manhattan's east side. It was entirely built of wood and originally named Hilltop Park until 1891 when the Giants moved in. It could seat 18,000 fans and for its day was designed fairly well. The fireproof parks to come were to be built from steel and concrete with dressing rooms for all of the players. Some stadiums would soon introduce the players' dugout and a designated area for vendors to serve not only drinks but hot food, restrooms for both men and women, mechanical scoreboards, and a manicured field of play with new base bags and a newly approved 17-inch wide 5-sided home plate. On December 17, 1903, two brothers from Dayton, Ohio would take their engine-driven wings to the air and beat Alexander Graham Bell, the man who had invented the telephone, to his dreams of man's first powered flight. An Englishman named Richard Stieff had designed a stuffed bear named Teddy after our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt, and there was finally peace between the NL and the AL when the two sides signed an agreement in Cincinnati. The National League accepted the American League status as a separate and equal official league. They would play within the same set of rules. Congress would propose the 16th Amendment authorizing an income tax. The year was 1909, the year of modern ballparks, with the Athletics' new Shibe Park in Philadelphia welcoming its fans at the start of the season. Forbes Field in Pittsburgh would be the next modern stadium to open. In 1911, the new Polo Grounds was completed after a fire reduced the old park to ashes. It would be the finest stadium built in its time, with a double-decked horseshoe that seated 35,000 New York fans. That same year, Redland Field, later renamed Crosley Field, opened in Cincinnati. The following year, Cleveland's League Park was built, and Comiskey Park in Chicago opened. Navin Field in Detroit was built over the old wooden Bennett Park. In 1914, Wiegum Park was built and eventually gave the Cubs their mighty palace when Charles Wiegum sold both the Cubs and the park to chewing gum magnate William Wrigley, who renamed the structure Wrigley Field in 1926. By 1915, just about every major ball club had its own modern stadium, and the game of baseball had become a game of business.
Baseball is too much of a sport to be a business, and too much of a business to be a sport. Philip Wrigley, owner of the Chicago Cubs.
Like the men who play the game on their grassy diamonds, each of these mighty structures has its own separate style and personality.
If it can be said that baseball stadiums are the body that embraces the game, then the fans are its blood, and the players breathe life into its lungs each time they exit the dugouts, and the words "play ball" echoes across the perfect diamond, upwards, through the bleachers, and into the sky, where those that once played have come to cheer the boys of this summer. Buster Nobles, a young pitcher who tried out for the Detroit Tigers' 1938 team.
Philadelphia's Shibe Park was the first of the modern steel and concrete stadiums. It was opened on April the 12th, 1909, and was named for Ben Shibe, a principal stockholder in the new Philadelphia franchise. The park was located at 21st Street and Lehigh Avenue and was the home of the Philadelphia A's until they were sold and moved to Kansas City for the 1955 season. One of Ben's partners in the club was a former catcher and American League promoter Cornelius McGillicuddy, better known as Connie Mack. Ben handled the business in the office, and Connie took care of the business on the field. He could always be found in the corner of the third base dugout, the end closest to home plate, with his scorecard rolled up in his hand and waving his outfielders around from batter to batter. He always wore a suit and tie with his white shirt and starched collar, no matter what the temperature was. He was as dignified as the ballpark. In 1935, Mack went to court to stop the people who lived on 20th Street from selling tickets to their rooftop makeshift bleachers. He lost the case, and using corrugated green metal, raised the 12-foot wall to 50 feet. The great tin green monster was born.
My first memory of the park was its majestic appearance. Its entrance behind home plate looked almost like a church. Bobby Shantz, the American League's most valuable player in 1952.
The park was renamed Connie Mack Stadium in 1952 for the man who owned and managed the team for half a century. Connie Mack died in 1956. He was 93. That same year, the park's old scoreboard in right field was replaced by one from Yankee Stadium. The last game in the park was played on October 1st, 1970, and went into extra innings as though the old park were fighting to hold on to every moment of play
before the towering temple would be silenced forever.
You can't win them all. Connie Mack, 1916.
The Polo Grounds was built as New York's first concrete and steel stadium by John T. Brush in 1911, after a raging fire destroyed most of the old wooden park that had been the home of the Giants since 1889. The 16,000-seat facility, still under construction, opened June 28th and stood on Manhattan's East 159th Street between Coogan's Bluff and the Harlem River. That October, the Giants would seat 34,000 fans to watch the 1911 World Series between the Giants and the Philadelphia Athletics. In those days, ballparks were designed to nestle into the center of the city so fans could easily get to the park. This would sometimes dictate the design and resulted in no two parks ever resembling each other.
The Giants remained in the park until they moved to San Francisco after the 1957 season. The American League Yankees shared the park until 1923, when John McCraw's National League club evicted the Yankees after the Giants owner had renovated the park that same year.
I cried when they took me out of the Polo Grounds. Babe Ruth, 1923.
The Yankees had been tenants of the Giants at the Polo Grounds for 10 years and had gone from a mediocre team in 1912 that only drew about 345,000 fans on the best of years at Hilltop Park to the mighty Yankees of 1920, when they became the first club to pass 1 million in paid attendance. They would outdraw the Giants by 360,000 that year. The Polo Grounds would be host to no less than 12 World Series, but the best of all of them was when the New York Giants faced the New York Yankees. The 1921, 22, and 23 seasons would see the Giants play the Yankees and the National League winning 2 out of the 3. In August 1921, Pittsburgh's KDKA had broadcast its first baseball game. Now, 2 months later, its parent company, Westinghouse, prepared to air the first all-New York World Series over a 3-station network. On October 5th, linked by direct line to KDKA, the fedora-topped New York Herald Tribune columnist Grantland Rice sat in the Polo Grounds and detailed the Yankees' 3-0 opening game victory. Bereft of Rice's banter, the other network stations, WJZ in Newark and WBZ in Springfield, Massachusetts, took a less direct route, baseball's first recreation. A reporter in the Polo Grounds relayed balls and strikes into a telephone. At the other end, a receiver pressed against his ear was a man who later worked at the first city-owned radio station, WCNY. Tommy Cowan, then 37, high atop the Newark Westinghouse building in a tin-girded shack. Cowan heard the signals and converted them to play-by-play for his audience. Blindly, ingeniously, he embellished action he had never seen. The Giants won the 1921 World Series and in 1922 swept the Cross River Yankees. By now, an estimated 3 million Americans owned at least one radio. On October 4th, 1922, over 5 million fans heard Grantland Rice and W.B. McGeehan air Game 1 of the series from the Polo Grounds. In 1923, the Yanks finally beat the Giants as radio now linked the Eastern Seaboard. In 1924, the Giants won their 4th straight pennant, but lost the Fall Classic to Washington 4-3. One of the most dramatic comebacks for the Giants happened in 1951, when Leo DeRoche's team would deliver a 16-game winning streak led by the 20-year-old Rookie of the Year Willie Mays and Sal Magley with a .293 earned run average and a league-leading 23 wins. Leo DeRoche loved it when his Giants won.
Well, the early announcers in radio began in the major leagues back in the late 20s as a regular thing, and basically in the Midwest with fellows like Hal Totten at Chicago, Ty Tyson in Detroit, Tom Manning in Cleveland, some of those great pioneer voices, Red Barber in Cincinnati. And there was a ban on broadcasting in New York until 1939 when Larry McPhail came in, brought Red in, and told the Giants and the Yankees that he was going to defy the ban and have baseball broadcasting. And up until 1948, all the major league broadcasters, and of course all the minor league broadcasters, did the road games by a telegraphic recreation. And it was a simple thing. You'd have a telegrapher in the ballpark where your team was playing on the road, and he would have the little bug, as they called it, the little telegraphic instrument, and via the Morse code he would send a message to a man in the studio where you were, and the telegrapher in your studio would write it out on a typewriter in the very abbreviated form. He'd have Smith up, S1C, that would be strike one called, B1W, ball one wide, FLOGS would be foul over the grandstand, and then very tersely he'd type out Smith out, short to first. So the job for the announcer would be to say, well, Jones is out on the mound looking into Brown to get the sign. Now he steps off the mound. Now he's back on. He looks to get the sign again. The outfield is a little bit around the left. The third baseman's in close at the grass. The other infielders are back a little bit. Here's a windup. Here's a pitch. Strike called. He got a slider on the outside corner just above the knees. Now that was S1C.
The Polo Grounds would host the World Series 5 more times before the Giants moved out of the park in 1957 to follow the Dodgers to California. The Mets played at the Polo Grounds from 1962 until their last game there on September 18, 1963, when they lost to the Phillies 5-1. In 1964, the Polo Grounds met the Wrecking Ball after 53 magnificent seasons. The wrecking crew used the same iron ball that was used to bring down Ebbets Field 4 years earlier. A housing project was constructed on the Polo Grounds site in 1965. I wonder if the residents ever hear the crack of Ruth's bat meeting the ball, or the sounds of the fans the day Bobby Thompson hit the 3-run 9th-inning home run that would become known as the shot heard round the world when the Giants won the pennant in 1951.
Just when my fellows learn to hit in this ballpark, they're going to tear it down. Casey Stengel, 1965.
In Washington, they were dedicating the Lincoln Memorial, and the literary world was celebrating the birth of Reader's Digest. In the offices of the Polo Grounds in New York, April 1922, Giants owner Charles Stoneham had a letter delivered to the owner of the Yankees, informing them that the Giants wished to occupy the Polo Grounds exclusively and requested they seek an alternative site. Separate ballparks, he suggested, would give them both an opportunity to play more Sunday dates. Sunday baseball had been legalized in New York since 1919. The Yankee owners had already seen the writing on the Polo Grounds wall and had taken an option on a tract of land across the Harlem River in the borough of the Bronx. Actually, it was walking distance from the Polo Grounds, a 10-acre site which had once been a lumber yard and at the time was farmland where fresh produce was sold. They bought the land for $600,000 from William Waldorf Astor on February 5, 1921. The first drawings called for a 3-decked stadium surrounding the entire playing field, but these plans were eventually dropped when it was determined that the field would not receive enough sunlight in the late afternoon. The stadium was built in only 284 days at a cost of $2.5 million. A lot of New Yorkers wanted to call it Ruth Stadium, but Rupert, the owner of the Yankees, would decide to call it simply Yankee Stadium. 1921 may have been Ruth's finest season ever. He set an all-time Major League record for runs with 177 and total bases of 457. He also boasted an .846 slugging average, just 1 percentage point below his 1920 mark, which remains an all-time high. Moreover, Ruth batted .378, walked 144 times, and knocked in 177 runs. Soon, he moved into his stadium. In 1923, a young singer strolled up Broadway to WEAF on his lunch break while serving jury duty. Entering its two-room, fourth-floor studio, he asked its program director for a tour of the facility. By the time he left, the radio station had hired a new announcer and broadcasting a future icon. Graham McNamee became what Red Barber called the greatest announcer we ever had. That October, McNamee was named Rice's colorman for the 1923 World Series. By Game 3, he was doing play-by-play from a ground-level seat at Yankee Stadium. Vivid and theatrical, McNamee used a carbon microphone, a scorebook, and his throaty, bursting voice. He made listeners feel close enough to the action to reach out and touch the field. By 1923, baseball was already big game America. To wit, opening day on April 18th at Yankee Stadium, 74,217 fans attended. An additional 25,000 were reportedly turned away. John Philip Sousa's band would play for the occasion as Governor Al Smith threw out the first ball. Who else but the Babe himself hit the first home run? The mighty Yankees beat Boston 4-1, and the legend had begun. The Yankees would invite the Giants to their new stadium as again the two teams faced off for the World Series. This time, it was the Yankees all the way as they took the Giants in a 4-game sweep. Another legendary character, Casey Stengel, would knock the first World Series homer in Yankee Stadium. Stengel would return to the Yankees as their colorful manager in 1949. In 1928, the triple decks were extended beyond the left field foul pole, and in 1937, a similar treatment was done to right field.
I know this. As I sat in the park and broadcast, really to myself, I thought, God, I'd give anything to broadcast in a place like this. Mel Allen, during the 1932 to 1938 ban on radio in New York.
In 1936, a lawyer left Alabama to briefly vacation in New York. He chose instead to stay and turn the law's loss into baseball's gain. Melvin Allen Israel, a.k.a. Mel Allen, soon owned the most fanatical following of any sportscaster in America. Listening, you would swear that a florist must have decorated his voice. From 1939 through 1964, he broadcast an unmatched 20 World Series and 24 All-Star games. As the voice of the Yankees, Allen to millions became the Yankees and brought joy to time zones away from the big ballpark in the Bronx. Joy took a tumble on July 4th, 1939. Even the toughest baseball player broke down as Iron Man Lou Gehrig said goodbye to his friends and fans. The Yankees captain had not missed a game in 14 years, even when illness began to doom him. Later, Allen called this day one of the saddest days of my life.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Yankee co-owner Larry MacPhail would put lights on the roof for night baseball in 1946. This mighty coliseum would also be the first to draw over 2 million fans in a single year. The 1951 season would bring the Yankees another championship as they took the Giants in 6 games. That same year, a changing of the guard would take place at Yankee Stadium as one of the greatest baseball players of all time, Joe DiMaggio, retired. And a 19-year-old outfielder would slip on the pinstripes and begin his Hall of Fame career, Mickey Mantle.
When I think about people say to me, if you ever had anything to change in your life, what would you change? And there's not one thing I would change. I was born here in New York City on the east side from maybe a little below average income family, and I was been a Yankee fan for maybe since I'm 8 years old. And my first recollection of Yankee Stadium is my father and my uncles bringing me up here when I was about 9 years old, which was about 1938, 1939. The biggest thrill I got the first time was I finally saw Joe DiMaggio play in a ball game, sitting in the bleachers, of course, who was only about 50 cents then. But that was probably the first big thrill I had walking into this ballpark until about 12 years later when I came in as a player. But in between then, I played a lot of sandlot baseball in Long Island and New York, and one of our fields was right next door to Yankee Stadium over here in McCombs Dam Park, which is maybe 200 yards from Yankee Stadium. And in high school, I played there, our high school games, never knowing, as a hard-hitting first baseman here in New York City, that someday I'd be pitching here in Yankee Stadium. I was lucky enough to win 9 straight games my rookie year. I finally lost one in relief of Eddie Lopat in Philadelphia. 53, everything went fine. I had a fairly good year. I think I won like 18 games and lost 5 or 6. We lucky enough to get in the World Series again. And this was, I was with the 50 team, but I didn't realize the Yankees won the World Series in 49, 50 when I was there. The 2 years I was in the Army, they won the World Series, 51 and 52. Well, no team had ever won more than 4 World Series in a row. And now 1953, all of a sudden the players start saying, we got to, get in that World Series this year. And we did. And sure enough, we beat the Brooklyn Dodgers, and we were the only team to ever win 5 straight World Series. And I have a ring on. I know you can't see it, but this is the 53 World Series ring that I really, I love to wear it. It's the, most World Series rings that the Yankees have gotten are the same, but this one has a 5 inside where that diamond is, and that denotes the 5 from winning 5 World Series in a row. And it's a very unusual ring, and it's my pride and joy. Well, one thing happened. We didn't win it in 1954, and one of the big reasons was the Cleveland Indians, in a 154-game schedule, I think won 110 games. We won, I think, 103, which is usually plenty to win a pennant and get in the World Series. But the Cleveland Indians beat us out, and it stopped our streak of 5 World Series in a row. So, I mean, we had nothing to be ashamed of, but then we got back into 55. 55 was another good year for us. The only thing with that was we finally got beat by the Brooklyn Dodgers in the World Series that year. I was lucky enough to be in 11 World Series. Probably, I wasn't much for records. The guys on the team didn't let you talk about yourself, and that was just the way I was brought up in the Yankee organization. You didn't say to the press, oh, I'd like to win 20 games this year and have so many strikeouts or hit 300. You just didn't say those things to the press. All you would say is, I want to win a pennant. We want to have, the team wants to have the best year we can. And it was all team, team, team.
As baseball entered the 70s, there was talk about moving the Yankees out of the old stadium into a Superdome in New Orleans. But a facelift in 1966 and 67 with new seats and a paint job had postponed the inevitable for a short time. Politics became involved in the decision of what to do with the great old Coliseum, as words like fabric of the community, charisma of the Yankees, synergy of the sport, and chemistry of the Bronx would finally convince the political powers to save the stadium. A plan was conceived for the city to take over the stadium, and once the city had control, it would rebuild and lease back the stadium to the Yankees for 30 years. The fate of Yankee Stadium, as it was known to Ruth, Garrick, Musial, Combs, DiMaggio, and Mantle, was sealed forever. But unlike the Dodgers and Giants, the pinstripe boys of summer would stay in New York. In 1973, Yankee Stadium would be gutted, and a completely new interior was constructed that would reopen in 1976.
I mean, the park has been changed in 74 and 5. They closed Yankee Stadium. We played at Chase Stadium those 2 years. And the stadium is much nicer. I mean, the clubhouse is nicer, the restrooms, the restaurants are nicer. But they went and shortened the outfield, those fences, and now they're just like any other ballpark. And I think it just took that great thing of people can no longer say Death Valley and left center field in Yankee Stadium. How Joe DiMaggio hit 360 or 70 home runs playing in this ballpark, I just couldn't believe that anybody could hit that many. A right-handed hitter hitting that many. I could see Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth doing what they did, but they were left-handed hitters. But I mean, Joe to hit that many home runs here, and I often say if he could have played in Fenway Park or Ebbets Field, or even the way the ballpark is now, I think, he would have probably had 600 home runs, especially if he was in Fenway Park or Ebbets Field. But this was my favorite ballpark to pitch in.
Even though they would call this new mighty structure Yankee Stadium, and the boys of summer would return to hollow ground, bringing them their first pennant in a dozen years, every true baseball enthusiast would always refer to it as the new park. NBC took formally to the air in 1926. On September 18, 1927, the Columbia Broadcasting System proclaimed its debut. Many teams were broadcast locally over network affiliates. If one had equipment and a license to broadcast, one had entree to any field. A station didn't pay a fee to a club for the privilege of solely carrying their game. In radio's pre-World War II universe, stations competed for listeners, not broadcast rights. Griffith Stadium was constructed in 1911 and was located on historic ground at 7th Street and Florida Avenue in Washington's northwest section.
It had been built over one of the old original playing fields that dated back to 1892. Byers 7th Street Park was situated amidst a forest of oak trees and experienced the many changes in the game until it was burned to the ground in 1910. Out of the ashes emerged one of America's great ballparks. Clark Griffith would manage the Senators from 1912 until he became president of the ball club in 1920, when the park was renamed Griffith Stadium. Griffith had been a pitcher-manager for the Chicago White Stockings and was one of the American League pioneers. He would head up the Senators for 35 years. Griffith had a scouting system for announcers as well as players. Born in Arkansas, Arch McDonald worked as a delivery boy, crop hand, peanut vendor, boxing referee, and patent medicine salesman. In 1934, he arrived on the Potomac, and as voice of the Senators, made his broadcast part showbiz and part parade. McDonald was a hustler, huckster, and a teller of tales. Of a rare Washington victory, he cooed a hillbilly ballad, "They cut down the old pine tree." Runners were ducks on the pond. Strikes were right down Broadway. Cried Arch of a Senator's homer, "There she goes, Mrs. Murphy." Through 1956, his play-by-play regaled Presidents Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. It continued the tradition of Griffith Stadium as the President's Park, a history begun when in 1910, William Howard Taft became the first chief executive to throw out the first ball at the start of the baseball season. In Washington, politics and baseball became more wed than Bogart and Bacall. To Griffith Stadium came cabinet members, senators, congressmen, visiting dignitaries, and residents of the White House yearning for an afternoon at the park.
If I didn't have to hobble up those steps in front of all those people, I'd be out at that ballpark every day. Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Beloved Ike was a Griffith Stadium regular in the 1950s. His favorite player was Mickey Vernon. In 1954, he gave Mickey a silver bat, saluting Vernon's league batting title. An even greater fan was Richard Nixon. As vice president in the 50s, his favorite player was Roy Sievers. When Sievers won the 1957 American League home run and RBI titles, Nixon chaired a special night at the park. That same year at Griffith Stadium, McDonald's successor Bob Wolfe asked Nixon to be his guest between games as a doubleheader. The two parlayed dialogue like vaudevillians on tour.
So I've just sauntered down here, down on the first deck, and I think that I'll ask this first gentleman here who has been watching the ball game how he's enjoying the game. Sir, how'd you like the first game today?
Well, of course, being a Washington fan, I thought it was great.
Well, these boys, you know, have been playing inspired ball. Have you had a chance to see many other games this season?
Well, I came out opening day. I saw the president throw the ball out that day, and Washington, as you recall, lost to the Yankees, I believe. It's a pretty good game, though.
I see you brought your daughter with you today.
Yes, and she has never seen a baseball game until today except on television. So this was a lucky day for her to see the winning game.
I see. What sort of work do you do, sir?
I work for the government.
Oh, for the government?
Yes,
huh?
Yes, I work for the government.
And
my boss is President Eisenhower.
Your boss is president?
Yes.
What sort of work do you do, sir?
Well, I'm the vice president.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Nixon.
Walter Johnson, seen here with Henny Wagner, was the second pitcher in history to win the most games in baseball. He got his first World Series win at Griffith in 1924 as the Senators defeated the New York Giants 4-3. It was the only Senators World Series championship, although they did win 2 more American League pennants. Joe DiMaggio broke George Sisler's modern record of hitting safely in 41 consecutive games by hitting a line drive single off Red Anderson of the Senators at Griffith in 1941, en route to his historic 56-game record. Brooks Robinson would play his first Major League game against the Senators.
I can remember my first game in 1955 against the Washington Senators, And as an 18-year-old, I got 2 for 4, drove in one of the big runs. We won the game that day. My first hit was off of a left-hand pitcher by the name of Chuck Stobbs, and I can remember running back to the hotel that night, the old Southern Hotel there in Baltimore, and I called my mom and dad, and I said, guess what? Just played in my first big league game, went 2 for 4, knocked in the winning run. I said, Mom, I said, Dad, this is my cup of tea. I said, I don't know why I ever spent all year in the minor leagues. Well, anyway, the next 18 times I went to bat that year, I went 0 for 18. I struck out 10 times, and that was probably the best lesson I ever learned, because I knew that I had a lot to learn and a long way to go before I became a bona fide major league player.
The late 50s Senators were a sad bunch, but seldom boring. One reason was a man who hit more home runs in the American League than anyone else except Babe Ruth. Harmon Killebrew was the league's right-handed slugger of all time. In October 1960, the Senators moved to Minnesota as the Minnesota Twins, but would return to the park to play the newly formed expansion team, the New Senators, for the last official Major League game in the park on September 21st, 1961. The last president to start the season in the old park was John F. Kennedy. Griffith Stadium was taken down, and the Howard University Hospital would stand on the spot where Washington royalty once watched the game of baseball.
Like all the old ballparks that are gone from our landscape but not from our memory, Griffith Stadium gave us great players and great times. They tore down the old ballpark in 1965, and my friends back in Washington tell me there isn't even a marker to show where a great lady once stood. Harmon Killebrew.
I don't ever forget the 70 World Series, because I tell people that I played almost 23 years professionally, and I don't think I ever had 5 games in a row like those 5 games in that World Series in any of those 23 seasons. You know, as an infielder, you can play a week and a half and never get a chance to do something spectacular. But in this particular series, just about every game, I had a chance to do something spectacular with the glove, and I was also hitting well too. And I tell people, the thing you don't remember, I can remember in the first game of the first World Series, I think it was Woody Woodward, who played for the Reds, hit me a little 24 hopper down to third base. The first inning of the first game, I got the ball, I made a high throw to Boog Powell for an error. And when you make a high throw to Boog Powell, you made a high throw. You know, he's a big boy. Anyway, I can remember after making that error, I said to myself, here we go again. Can you believe it? You get to the World Series and you just can't handle the pressure. Well, everything else after that was pretty upbeat, and it turned out I was the MVP of the World Series. But it was truly exciting, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime 5-game series, and it just happened to be the World Series.
This is Tiger Stadium, built in 1912. If you were to dig deep enough below home plate, you might find the remains of another park that stood right here when baseball was in its infancy. That park was Bennett Field, the first home of the Detroit Tigers. This stadium, then named Nevin Field, replaced Bennett Field and is now one of the last 3 great ballparks left standing. It was renamed Briggs Stadium in 1938 when Walter Spike Briggs bought the Tigers and added a second deck to the stadium, creating its distinctive overlapping look. Bennett Field was a series of wooden bleachers surrounding a grassy diamond with a wooden wall on 3 sides behind home plate. It wasn't much of a park compared to today's Superdomes, but at the time it was every kid's dream to spend a day close up to their summertime heroes, or maybe, just maybe someday, to play with the best of the best. Tyrus Raymond Cobb, Ty Cobb, the Georgia Peach, would join the Tigers in 1905 and remain with the club for 22 years. It was Cobb's popularity that forced Frank Navin to increase the capacity of the park to 23,000 seats in 1911 and introduce the first batter's background, a green wall in center field. 2 years later, the National Commission would mandate that every park had to construct a similar wall in center field. By the time this stadium opened, Cobb had become a legend in his own time. He signed with the A's in 1928 and retired the following season. He still holds several Major League career titles.
I'd like to get an idea of who you think is the greatest pitcher ever batted against. Well, I can only name 4 or 5 of the greatest, and I can't help but say that Young was one of the greatest pitchers that ever lived for the simple reason that he won in his career 508 ball games. Nowadays, when a man wins 20 games, he's supposed to have had a great season. Well, you can figure that out, that old Cy Young won 20 ball games for 25 years and 8 besides. Of course, we have other wonderful pitchers. We have Walter Johnson, Ed Walsh, Christy Matheson, Alexander, and many, many other.
On April 19, 1927, the first voice of the Tigers leaned forward, nudged the WWJ radio microphone, surveyed this handsome ballpark, and christened Detroit baseball on the air. "Good afternoon, boys and girls," he said. "This is Ty Tyson speaking to you from Navin Field." Through 1942, Edwin Lloyd Tyson gripped an entire region, making fans of housewives and umpires of fans. Tyson was followed by Harry Heilman, Van Patrick, and of course, Mr. Harwell.
My final year in Baltimore was 1959, and we had a final series at Yankee Stadium. I got back from the ballpark on Saturday night, the night before the final game, and I got a phone call from George Kelm. And George said, "Ernie, the Tigers are thinking about making an announcing change. Van Patrick is going to leave, and the Tigers are interested in you. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Well, George, I've got a good job here in Baltimore, and I don't know, but I certainly would like to talk with the Tigers." So they flew me out during the World Series of '59. We made a deal, and I went to Detroit. And it's certainly been a rewarding time for me with the great fans of Michigan. And right after I came to Detroit, Briggs Stadium changed its name to Tiger Stadium. And of course, it's still Tiger Stadium. And it's a very great, traditional, fabled old ballpark. And I've had a great time there.
In 1934, the Tigers would play in their first series since 1909 and lose to St. Louis 4-3. But they would return the following year to face the Cubs. The Tigers would take the series 4-2, despite the fact that Tiger slugger Hank Greenberg broke his wrist when hit by a pitched ball in Game 2. Movietone News catches father and son enjoying a day at the park. Dad, Henry Ford, talks with humorist Will Rogers as Etzel Ford checks out the lineup. The same year, Walter Spike Briggs would begin a systematic overhaul of the stadium that would eventually result in a fully enclosed park.
And in most of the old ballparks, I can remember Detroit specifically, and even the Red Sox ballparks, I mean, they don't think about the players most of the time. I mean, to me, I always said when I looked at that Detroit dugout, I said, they must have had 25 midgets playing for them. I mean, the dugouts, you could just barely squeeze into it. And the thing you had to remember, if someone did something on your ball club, like hit a home run, just be careful that you don't jump up because you're going to bang your head right on the top of the dugout. So you had to remind the young guys who had never been there before, hey, just be careful when you jump up because you got a good chance to bang your head. And the same way in the Red Sox ballpark. But you had to be careful coming to the dugout because there's a large step down. I mean, it's not something you just walk down normally. So you had to really be careful getting in and out of the dugouts, especially in the real old ballpark. Kaminsky Park was the same way. We went to White Sox Park to play. That's another ballpark that had all antiquated dugouts and dressing rooms, and of course all those things have changed now.
Since 1912, this stadium has hosted 6 World Series. The last to date was in 1984. Detroit fans watched the Tigers take the San Diego Padres in 5 games, and who could forget Kurt Gibson's 2 homers in Game 5 to clinch the series.
I got there just as the bus was leaving for the ballpark. Now, if you're around baseball very long, you know the bus waits for no one. When it's 4 o'clock, you go to the ballpark. So I get there, get out of the cab, and Freddie Hutchinson, my manager, sees me, gets out of the bus and says, "Go check in, and we'll wait for you." Now here I am, an 18-year-old skinny kid, pimples all over my face, had the only suit on that I owned in my life. I get on the bus. Now where am I going to sit? I don't know anybody. They know that I'm taking somebody's job away from them because they had to send somebody out when I joined the ball club. And that was the scariest moment I ever had in my life when I got on that bus. All those veteran ball players looking at me and saying, "Who in the world is this kid?" And finally, Ted Gray, who was the player rep, grabbed me by the arm and said, "Sit down, kid, I want to talk to you." And I was so happy he did, because I was ready to stand up all the way to the ballpark. The first day I joined the ball club, I get dressed. They didn't have a uniform big enough for me. I had to use the Bat Boys uniform because I was only 145, 150 pounds and didn't have a uniform that size, so I wore the Bat Boys uniform with a number on it. I don't know what number it had at that time. And seventh inning, Freddie Hutchinson, who did not know my name, said, "Hey, kid, come here. I want you to pinch hit." So I didn't have a bat. I didn't take any batting practice. I grabbed the bat, and it was too big for me. But fortunately, the very first pitch off of Harry Bird, who was their star pitcher at that time, and he looked like a monster out there, 6'4", 230 pounds. I hit the very first pitch to center field, made an out. I was never so happy to make it out in my life because I wanted to get off the field. There was only about 4,000 people in the stands, but that was many more than I'm used to seeing as a high school player. So I learned very early that you had to be ready to go into the ball game at any time. Johnny Pesky took me under his wing. He was told to take care of me, and when I wasn't playing in the ball game, I had to sit next to Johnny Pesky because he would tell me, describe to me what was going on in the game, what was expected of me, what I should have done, or what that person should have done, and try to feed me how to play in the big leagues. Well, my first time in this park, I was living at a hotel downtown and could walk to the ballpark. It was only about 3 blocks away, 4 blocks away, so you walked to the ballpark, and you had to go through the guard, and he didn't know who I was. He saw this young kid that he didn't recognize, and I had to really persuade him that, hey, I'm the new player, I just signed a contract, and so on and so forth. So you go through the parking lot, and then you had to walk through a tunnel. I said, "Where am I going?" "I'm going through a tunnel." It was the concession place. That's where they made all the food, the hot dogs, the popcorn, and then I had to walk through the hallway, through the under the stadium, and I had to ask some of the people, where's the locker room? So finally I made my way to the locker room, and the guard standing there let me through and so on. Then I looked in the locker room, I said, God, it was a small little place. I was visualizing a big, huge locker room with all the facilities, but no, the old ballpark was just enough for about 25 players, manager and coach, and that was about it. So they took me to my locker, and they showed me where my locker was, way around in the corner, hidden away from all the veteran players, because they didn't want me associating with the veteran players, and the veterans didn't want me around. But I was happy. I got my uniform, and I had number 25. My first year with the ball club, they gave me number 25, and that was fine. But my favorite numbers was number 6, Stan Musial, boy, I idolized him, and number 9, Ted Williams. They were my favorites in high school, and I followed them. I looked in the paper to see which one got the most hits, and I said to myself, I would like to have one of their numbers one of these years. I'd like to wear number 6 or number 9. And the following year, Pat Mullen, the very fine veteran outfielder for the Tigers for many years, was given his release, and he wore number 6. And he came up to me, he says, as he was leaving, he says, Al, he says, I'd like you to wear number 6. Man, I was so happy because I wasn't about to ask for anything because I was just a rookie. And man, I wore number 6, and of course I wore it the rest of my career.
In the late 1980s, there was talk of tearing down Tiger Stadium. The Bengals fan club began a movement to stop the destruction of this baseball icon. They were successful in placing Tiger Stadium on the National Register of Historic Places.
Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball, the rules and realities of the game. Jacques Barzoon, Professor, Columbia University, 1954.
I had very good luck pitching in Detroit, but it was a great hitter's ballpark. And Hank Greenberg years ago, I remember, I think hit 58 home runs, came close to tying Babe Ruth's 60. But Detroit was a great ballpark to hit in, and it was dressing rooms were nothing, the dugouts were too small, but you just loved playing in that ballpark.
If you ask anyone from Brooklyn who invented baseball, they'll be quick to tell you we did. For more than 135 years, kids from Brooklyn, both young and old, have not only played the game, but argued continuously about who was the best of the best. If you ask them what was the best ballpark ever built, some may even think for a moment, but undoubtedly they will say Ebbets Field. Now, a few may even say the Polo Grounds, and if you stood around long enough, you could find yourself in the middle of a great debate, Brooklyn style.
The ground where Ebbets Field was located at one time was a garbage pit known as Pigtown.
It was 4.5 acres, bordered by Bedford Avenue, Sullivan Place, Franklin Avenue, and Montgomery Street. Some say the grass was even greener than an Irish countryside. It was named after the Dodger president, Charles Ebbets. Ebbets Field was one of those unique parks that started to create history even before the door was open on April 9, 1913. In fact, the fans who planned to sit in the bleachers had to wait outside the door because somebody forgot the key. But that wouldn't be the end of this history-making day, because as the ceremonial march reached the center field flagpole, it was realized that nobody had brought a flag. This mighty park would see 28 World Series games played on its emerald diamond. Compared to some, it was small, containing only 32,000 seats. Whenever the Giants came to Brooklyn, the stadium was packed. In fact, on Memorial Day 1934, 42,209 fans poured into the stadium to watch the Giants and the Dodgers battle it out.
I went to the Dodgers in 1948. In late July, Red Barber, their legendary announcer, was on the road in Pittsburgh and had an ulcer perforate. And he was very sick. They sent him to the hospital. And Branch Rickey, his boss, contacted my boss, Earl Mann, in Atlanta and said that he wanted Ernie Harwell to come up and replace Red while Red was in the hospital. So Mr. Mann said, well, Mr. Rickey, I've got Ernie under contract, but if you really want him, send me your catcher from Montreal, Cliff Dapper, and you can have Ernie Harwell. So I was traded for a minor league catcher. And I went to Brooklyn, went up and talked to Mr. Rickey, and we made a deal. And it was certainly a fabled ballpark and a great place to break in, because I had never even seen a game in the National League at that time. And Jackie Robinson, with the help of Branch Rickey, had just broken the color line, and he was an outstanding player. The Dodgers were in the pennant race as I went up there about the 4th of August. And naturally, I was very nervous coming into the big leagues. I had dreamed of being a big league announcer, and this was my chance. But the people of Brooklyn really opened their arms and hearts to me, and it was a great place to work. I loved Ebbets Field.
At the beginning of the World Series in 1947, I experienced a completely new emotion. When the national anthem was played, this time I thought it was being played for me as much as for anyone else. This is organized Major League Baseball, and I am standing here with all the others, and everything that takes place includes me. Jackie Robinson from the anthology, This I Believe.
The Dodgers were close to bankruptcy in 1938 when the National League officials proposed that Larry MacPhail step in and save the Brooklyn franchise. Reluctantly, the Dodgers directors agreed to meet MacPhail's terms. One of the first things MacPhail did was break the 5-year-old radio ban and lure Red Barber from Cincinnati. Quickly, Barber made Dodgers baseball almost existential pleasure. In Brooklyn, fans still recall the Redhead's magic. On summer evenings, you could stroll by front stoops and candy stores and not miss a pitch. From 1939 through 1953, Barber stirred a loyalty, the sense that baseball belonged to the fans that had not previously impelled the game and has rarely embraced it since. In 1954, he moved to Yankee Stadium to work with Mel Allen. 24 years later, they became the first broadcasters to enter the Hall of Fame.
If I were playing third base and my mother were rounding third with the run that was going to beat us, I'd trip her. Oh, I'd pick her up and brush her off and say, "Sorry, Mom, but nobody beats me." Leo DeRocha.
The Brooklyn Bums would soon belong to the tender ear of memory. In 1957, moving to California, they traded Ebbets Field for El Dorado West.
Something went out of baseball when the Dodgers left Brooklyn. Not all the King's horses or all the King's men can ever put it back. Leo DeRocha.
By the way, the man who gave the Dodgers the name the Bums was a truck driver named Abby, who rarely missed a game.
Baseball is hearing the man behind you call your husband a bum.
I think the players really enjoyed playing in Ebbets Field because it was intimate, little ballpark with a lot of love in it.
Historical Ebbets Field came to its end on February 23, 1960. The demolition crew was dressed in Dodger blue windbreakers, and Lucy Monroe sang the national anthem. The ball would crush the grandstands and the outfield wall, but not the legend that would place Ebbets Field as one of the greatest parks in baseball history. If you've ever made your way down Michigan Avenue in Chicago on a windy day, you can get some idea of why Wrigley Field was tagged the Bermuda Triangle of ballparks. There is a wind unlike any other major league park that gets caught up in this stadium. This strange wind can work for or against you. It blows off Lake Michigan, 3 blocks northeast of the park. Wrigley was built in 1914 by Lucky Charlie Wiegum. Lucky Charlie was one of the money men who bankrolled the ill-fated Federal League whales. Wiegum had made himself a millionaire before the First World War by opening up a chain of lunchrooms. Now he and Fighting Jim Gilmore became involved with the Federal League's Chicago franchise. Now, the way Chicago was laid out at that time, the city grew south of the lake, then west. All the ballparks that were built at that time were built on the south side and the west side. Wiegum decided to build what was originally known as the North Side Park on a piece of property where the Chicago Lutheran Theological Seminary had stood. Normally, the parks were built in the center of the city, nestled right in the middle of the growing community. In Chicago, Wiegum decided to do something a little different. People in the south side of Chicago never, ever traveled to the west side of Chicago, let alone the north side, which was relatively undeveloped. Wiegum hired Zachary Taylor Davis, the architect who designed Comiskey Park, and asked him to pattern the new park after the recently renovated Polo Grounds in New York. He broke ground on March 4th, 1914, and immediately started construction on the bleachers in right field. This way, he could get the reporters out early and give them something to write and talk about. On April 19th, more than 4,000 yards of soil and 4 acres of blue grass were moved to create the infield and outfield. On April 23rd, this $250,000 park opened.
Many of our citizens will today visit the North Side for the first time. The North Side lacks the odors from the stockyards that have made the South Side so popular. Ring Lardner, Chicago Tribune columnist.
The South Side stockyards were where the cattle came to be pinned and eventually slaughtered, so a trip out to this community in the fresh air on the north side was one of Wiegum's attractions. Any man who could go from an $8 a week waiter to a millionaire with a chain of restaurants of his own obviously had a lot of moxie. Wiegum was definitely a promoter. He was the first park owner to provide maps and travel tips to citizens in order to help them get to the park so they wouldn't get lost. Going to the north side was an adventure, and Wiegum was going to see to it that you enjoyed it. He was the first park owner to let the fans keep the balls that were hit into the stands. It was common practice up until then to return the balls to the field. When the fans began to complain about the concessionaires who strolled through the park during the game and ruined their view or the excitement of the play, Wiegum was the first owner to install permanent concession stands away from the bleachers. He also instituted Ladies' Day and made it a big event. Whatever Wiegum was doing, it was paying off. To the American and National Leagues, the Federal League was considered to be an outlaw organization. In 1913, Wiegum's partner Gilmore tried to talk Van Johnson into letting the feds fall under the national agreement, but Johnson turned him down, period. Over the next few years, the Federal League tried to woo players away from the other two leagues, offering more money and the elimination of the reserve clause. Some of the major players did cross over. In 1914 and 15, 115 players jumped the minor league reserve list to join the Federal League. The American and National Leagues took their case to the courts, and of course, the Federal League countersued. One franchise which was hard hit by the feds was Baltimore, and among the promising players owner Jack Dunn was forced to sell during his struggle with the Federals was a 19-year-old baby-faced left-handed pitcher named George Herman Ruth. He was sold to the Boston Red Sox in midsummer 1914. He had already earned his nickname, Babe. In the court battle, the Federals asked the courts to declare all existing national agreements void and dissolve organized baseball and more. The judge in the case was none other than Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who would become commissioner of baseball in 1922. After hearing all the testimony, he decided not to render a decision, for a while at least.
Baseball is something more than a game to an American boy. It is his training field for his life work. Destroy his faith in its squareness and honesty, and you have destroyed something more. You have planted suspicions of all things in his heart. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis.
In December, the case was settled out of court. The two older leagues bought out the Federals and dissolved the organization with a $600,000 payment distributed to the Federal League backers. A portion of this went to Wiegum, who in turn used the money to buy the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs moved into the North Side Park, and all was well, at least for a while.
All ball players want to wind up their careers with the Cubs, Giants, or Yankees. They just can't help it. Dizzy Dean.
In 1918, Lucky Charlie Wiegum's lucky days would come to an end. During World War I, the entire country suffered, and Wiegum was no exception. He was finally forced to sell the Cubs to chewing gum era William Wrigley Jr. In 1922 and 23, the entire grandstand and playing field were moved 60 feet southwest toward the intersection of Clark and Addison. The pitcher's mound of today is where home plate was in the early 20s. The park was officially named Wrigley Field in 1926. The outfield bleachers were removed, and the grandstand was double-decked, and now a little over 30,000 fans could watch the Cubs play Chicago ball. Joe McCarthy's Cubs took their first pennant at Wrigley in 1929, but lost the series to the A's. They won their second pennant in 1932, but unfortunately had to face the unbeatable Yankees, who swept the series 4-0.
I'd play for half my salary if I could hit in his dump all the time. Babe Ruth before the third game of the World Series.
This was the game that has become one of baseball's controversial barroom jousts. According to some, the Babe called his last series homer by pointing towards where the ball eventually landed. Did he in fact call it? Did he promise a little boy in the hospital that he'd hit a home run for him in the World Series? Well, that's the way it was played in the movie with William Bendix, and I kind of like that. Chicago would lose the series to Detroit in 1935 and again to New York in 1938, and lost to Detroit again in 45. The club that was always a bridesmaid but never a bride had not to date an opportunity to bring a series home.
Wrigley Field is a Peter Pan of a ballpark. It has never grown up, and it has never grown old. Let the world race on. They'll still be playing day baseball in the friendly confines of Wrigley Field. Outfielders will still leap up against the vines. And the Cubs, well, it's the season of hope. This could be the Cubbies' year. E.M. Swift, sports writer.
Each year, it seems, is Harry Carey's year. For half a century, he has been the Jackie Gleason of baseball broadcasting. Carey broke into radio in 1945, and for 25 years, he owned St. Louis. "Holy cow," he cried over the Cardinal network, broadcasting from the bleachers, trapping foul balls with a fishnet, roaring, ripping, always telling it like it was. In 1969, the Cardinals stunned baseball by firing him. In 1971, Carey moved to Chicago's Comiskey Park, where his style won a new league and legions of fans. In 1981, the same year another great, Jack Brickhouse, retired, Carey shocked Chicago by moving uptown to the Cubs. From Wrigley Field, he used Superstation television to become a national as well as a local hero. In 1984, his Cubs won their first pennant in 39 years. 5 years later, Harry Carey entered the Hall of Fame. Then there was the day he shared the booth with another ex-Cubs announcer. There they went again, the Gipper, and holy cow.
Runners first and third, 2 out.
I want to know about your suspenders.
As of today, at least this great old park still stands proudly on the north side of Chicago. Its distinctive classic design is a constant reminder of another time. A time when milk was delivered to the doorstep by a horse-drawn wagon, and you knew the mailman's children by their first names. A time when you brought a baseball card for the gum, and you either traded it for your hero or attached it to the spokes of your bike with a clothespin. And a time when a lot of us dreamed of our own picture and stats inside a gum wrapper. Like Clark Griffith, player-manager Charles Comiskey was one of Harry Wright's disciples. Comiskey moved his St. Paul club of the Western League to the south side of Chicago as part of the formation of the American League. The new Chicago White Sox won the American League pennant in 1901 and again in 1906. They played at that time in one of the wooden fenced-in South Side parks. The park only held 15,000 and was another of the fire traps of early baseball. With the popularity of the White Sox growing, Comiskey decided to build a park befitting of his team. Comiskey was able to get his hands on a piece of property on the south side where West 35th Street, Wentworth Avenue, 34th Place, and South Shields Avenue held a city dump. On March 17, 1910, a green cornerstone was laid in place. It was St. Patrick's Day, and less than 4 months later, on July 1st, Comiskey opened his park. They built the park so fast that it is said the workmen stopped pounding long enough to sit in the bleachers and watch the game. St. Louis beat the White Sox 2-0 on opening day. The grandstand was a covered double-decked horseshoe that curved around home plate. This was attached to a covered single-decked pavilion which ran along the foul line with open wooden bleachers edging the outfield. The park would hold 32,000 fans. 7,000 of these seats were 25-cent bleacher seats. In 1926 and 27, major structural changes increased the park's seating capacity to 52,000. Some of the wooden left and right field bleachers were replaced with double-deck steel and concrete covered stands. Open bleachers were added to center field. The park started out to be designed as a pitcher's field, but that was no surprise considering Ed Walsh, the White Sox spitball king, worked with the architects to design the original park. Over the years, the diamond had moved back and forth until finally in the 1980s, the distance to the fences made it a hitter's park. There were 4 World Series at Comiskey, 1917, 1918, and 1919, and the last World Series in 1959. The 1918 series involved not the White Sox, but rather the Cubs, who for a while were sharing the stadium. The Cubs lost the series to Boston 4-2. Probably the most infamous series ever played in baseball was the 1919 meeting between the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. Everyone was aware that gambling had become a part of the game, but nobody would suspect that the great American sport could go as bad as it did in 1919. As one young baseball fan wrote in a letter to his hero,
"Say it ain't so, Joe."
The truth would not come out until the following year that 8 Chicago players, including shoeless Joe Jackson, had taken money from gamblers to throw the World Series. Of the scheduled 9 games, Game 3, 4, 5, and 8 were played at Comiskey Park. Cincinnati would take the series, but the Chicago team would soon be known as the Black Sox of 1919. The ones that admitted throwing the game would leave baseball in shame. Low salaries and hard times would be their excuse. Some, including shoeless Joe, always maintained they were innocent. Joe pointed to his .375 batting average and his 6 RBIs as proof.
They can't come back. The doors are closed to them for good. The most scandalous chapter in the game's history is closed. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, August 1921.
In Kansas City, the first colored World Series took place in 1924, with the Kansas City Monarchs winning 5-4 over Hilldale. Comiskey Park would also play host to many of the Negro League World Series games, and from 1933 until 1950, it was the home of the Negro League's East-West All-Star Games. Pitcher Satchel Paige drew 51,700 fans for the West in the 1943 All-Star Game. Some say the biggest event ever to hit Comiskey Park was when Bill Veeck and a syndicate headed by Veeck and home run slugger Hank Greenberg bought the Chicago team and the park from the Comiskey heirs on March 10, 1959. Veeck was a marketing genius or a genuine reincarnation of showman P.T. Barnum. Veeck would bring his own unique, outrageous style to promoting the game and single-handedly change the game of baseball. He painted the old brick park white and did renovations throughout the interior of the park. In 1960, Veeck would put a new look to scoreboards by installing the game's first exploding scoreboard. It had 8 large columns with giant pinwheels and large speakers throughout. On opening day in 1960, he sprang it on the fans. It had fireworks, it whistled, and made all sorts of unbelievable sounds.
Every innovation in baseball, except a couple of kooky things that Charlie Finley tried, like orange baseballs and silly uniforms, originated with Vec. Electric scoreboards, giveaways, fan days, concerts, and a pinch-hitting midget, Hank Greenberg.
Because of poor health, Vec had to sell the White Sox to Arthur C. Allen Jr. in June 1961. But in 1975, 14 years later, he returned to Comiskey Park. The following year, Vec would bulldoze the artificial turf which had been installed in the infield and replaced it with real grass. He gave away pieces of the plastic carpet to fans as a promotion. In January 1981, Vec was again forced to sell the White Sox and the deed to the mighty stadium. Old Comiskey Park would have to endure the disgrace of having to watch the construction of the new oval, super-modern Comiskey Park being built right next door. The last game at Comiskey Park was played in 1990 before 42,849 fans. Before the demolition crew would tear down the old park, the infield dirt, which was a mix of sand and clay, was carefully removed and taken to the new park so that a piece of history would always remain near the birthplace of this great Chicago stadium. The place where the old park stood is now a parking lot for the new stadium.
I miss the old ballparks more than anything. I don't think people enjoy today's stadiums as much. Back then, you came out of the park and went across the street. You were in a bar, a hot dog palace, a restaurant. Now all there is when you walk out is a parking lot, and you can't get out of it. Bill Mazeroski.
One park I didn't like to pitch in was the one I just mentioned, Fenway Park. They had a left field fence there. They call it the Green Monster. They have a sign on the left field line saying 315 feet. Well, we've measured that a few times. You know how you measure your walk in golf? For each yard you take a step? Well, we can't figure it's any more than 295 feet down that left field line in Fenway Park. I guess somebody's actually measured it, but I couldn't believe it was 315. But that was probably my most unfavorite ballpark.
If Yankee Stadium is the house that Ruth built, then the Red Sox is the team that Fenway Park built. The Red Sox were in the basement, 24 games out of first place. But after Fenway Park opened, they quickly became the world champions. Fenway opened on April 20th, 1912, the very week the Titanic sunk and took 1,502 passengers with her, and was dedicated in May by Boston Mayor John F. Honeyfitz Fitzgerald, John Kennedy's maternal grandfather. Fitzgerald threw out the first ball, and a crowd of 27,000 went to their feet with a roar when Tris Speaker drove in the winning run as Boston beat the New York Highlanders, eventually to become the Yankees, 7-6 in 11 innings. Although the park seemed to be smaller than other concrete and steel stadiums built around the same time, it allowed the fans a close-up view of the action. You could see the pitchers sweat and hear the calls and comments from the players at the plate.
The thing that excited me was I was a real student of the game as far as the history of the game. I mean, I knew all the players and read books about guys like Johnny Vandermeer, Ewell Blackwell. I mean, Stan Musial was my idol when I was growing up, and, you know, Harry the Hat Walker. And so I knew a history of the game, and going to Fenway Park, and you just knew what had happened in Fenway Park. Knew all the great Yankee Red Sox teams back in the 40s and the great battles they had with the New York Yankees. And you knew about Ted Williams. And, of course, I got a chance to play against Ted, and a lot of great things happened when we played the Red Sox. But those ballparks were really unique, especially, I'd say, Fenway Park in Detroit and Tiger Stadium.
Even though football was a popular sport for over 40 years in Boston, Fenway was built as a pure baseball park. It was 488 feet to center field and would be the site of the World Series in 4 out of 5 years from 1914 through 1918. A young slugger pitcher joined the Red Sox in 1916 and hurled 13 consecutive scoreless innings to record a 14-inning 2-1 victory over Brooklyn in Game 2 of the 1916 World Series. The fans were only getting glimpses of Babe Ruth's power at bat. On April 6, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson declared that the United States was in a state of war with Germany. The Selective Service Act was passed, and 22,815,270 men were inducted into the armed services by September 12, 1918. The 1st Division, under the direction of General Blackjack Pershing, embarked for France. Baseball was not declared an essential employment status, and the government ordered the season to be cut off on Labor Day, September 2nd. The White Sox, who were the defending champions, lost some of their best players and dropped to 6th place, 17 games out. The Cleveland Indians team finished 2nd, behind the completely overhauled Red Sox. Manager Ed Barrow had moved Ruth to the outfield. The Red Sox triumphed over the Cubs in a 6-game series, winning 4 games to 2. The Red Sox young pitcher slugger Ruth was sold to the Yankees on December 26, 1919 for $125,000. Owner Harry Frazee had put himself in financial debt and was forced to sell the slugging Bombino and mortgage the park for $350,000. Frazee would end up selling the club and park to Bob Quinn, the general manager of the St. Louis Browns.
Jackie Mitchell's greatest asset is control. She can place the ball where she pleases, and her knack at guessing the weakness of a batter is uncanny. She doesn't hope to enter the big show this season, but she believes that with careful training, she may soon be the first woman to pitch in the big leagues. In that event, she sees no reason why she shouldn't command as great a salary as Babe Ruth now draws. The Chattanooga News, March 31st, 1931.
In 1929, Herbert Hoover would take office as our 31st president. On October 9th, the stock market would crash. Unrestrained speculation during the Coolidge era would finally result in Wall Street devastation. It unleashed an uncontrolled domino effect on businesses, banks, and employment, resulting in a worldwide disaster. Hundreds of ball players joined the millions of Americans who were out of work.
Fenway is only a ballpark, the way the Sistine Chapel is only a church. Boston Globe sports writer Dan Shaughnessy.
Fenway would not see another World Series until 1946, when Boston would lose 3-4 to St. Louis. Again, war had changed the face of baseball when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. And before Congress, President Roosevelt declared a state of war. Some baseball players ignored the Essential Employment Act and signed up to play on Uncle Sam's team.
That's right. It's a ball game between the 7th Army Air Force team and the Fort Shafter 9. Tangling in a nip-and-tuck battle that relegates the Japs to 2nd place. Lucky ball fans, cramming all available space, get a close-up of DeMage flashing his old-time Yankee form as he takes a healthy cut at the ball to connect for a sharp single through short.
In 1945, as our boys came home, Fenway would begin to build a new post-war team. In 1946, Ted Williams was one soldier home from active duty who seemed stronger and better than ever. The Red Sox took an early lead and ended up winning the American League pennant by 12 games over Detroit. Williams's stats would read a batting average of .342, 38 home runs, 123 RBIs, as well as being named the Red Sox most valuable player. Before the powerhouse Williams would retire in 1960, he would hit his 500th home run.
One of the biggest thrills playing in Fenway Park is getting a chance to play against Ted Williams. And the thing I still talk about, I remember being there for his last game. And his last time at bat, would you believe, he hit a home run? And the time before he hit the home run, he hit one up against it. Al Pilarczyk, our center fielder, I think jumped up and robbed him. And then to come up the plate for the last time in his illustrious career and hit a home run, I can still remember him coming around to second base, and I'm just kind of standing there with my arms folded, and it looked like a big war horse coming through there. And the thing was that Ted wouldn't come back out and tip his cap to the fans. So I think Pinky Higgins was the manager. So what Pinky did, he sent him out to left field, and then he took him out of the game so the fans could give him another standing ovation. But I always say that was certainly one of the biggest thrills that I've ever had, and I had a chance to see Ted the last time up hit the home run.
This unique park still stands on the south side of Boston as a constant reminder that baseball history is more than player stats, old photos, and baseball cards. The history of baseball was made in parks like Fenway.
When it comes to ballparks, I know they have to think about the economics of the game, but I think the smart owner mixes the old with the new and gives us a touch of the true history of baseball. What they're doing in Texas shows it can be done. A baseball fan.
The brick and mortar that is the foundation of these remaining icons contain the living history of those who have chased a ball into its outfields, performed a double play on its diamonds, and stood at home plate to watch a ball fly over the wall into the hands of humanity. Between 1909 and 1923, there were 15 Major League cement and steel stadiums built. As of 1994, only 3 remained: Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, and Tiger Stadium.
In their lifetime, they have seen the best of the best not work the game, but play the game of baseball. We are left to wonder if sometime in the far-off future, when it's time to take down the Superdomes of the modern era, will they be able to look back with reverence for these stadiums, or just the players and the games that were played in these multi-use look-alike structures? Today we have taken a moment in time to honor the original stadiums, which made the game the American pastime and provided the players with a field of dreams.